All right, let's talk about foreign affairs in the new nation. We're talking about interactions with other countries. That's what foreign affairs means. And other countries would include Native Americans. They are not, they are their own nations, they are their own entities. And so dealing with them would also fall under this category of foreign affairs. We're talking about the time period starting right after the new government with the current U.S. Constitution was put into place. So when George Washington becomes president and onward. As we go through this slideshow, I want you to consider the amount of respect being shown to America from various countries and whether or not it's changing over the course of time. All right, so George Washington. This is review, right? We know that during his presidency, the French Revolution began. The French people started an uprising against their king. And during this time period, England kind of took advantage of that, and France and England are at war. And the U.S. has to decide what to do about this and whether or not to get involved at all. And of course, we know Washington and Congress decide to stay out of it, not to make treaties, not to pick sides. Instead, Washington gives us the Neutrality Proclamation, right? He wants to stay involved and continue trading with countries, but he doesn't want to take any sides politically, right? Now, we know in the end this didn't work out very well. It made both England and France mad at us for not choosing sides. And so America ends up having to go into sort of our first negotiations with some other countries to try to get what we want. And with the English, we know Jay Treaty was made, right? You can see the terms of it reviewed there for you if you need to take a look at them again. This slide tells you it's considered a failure. We didn't talk a ton about that, but Americans really felt like they were giving up stuff that they shouldn't be giving up. You know, why pay war debts if you won the war? And they felt like they weren't getting very much from Britain. Remember, the English never actually agreed to stop attacking American ships, and they're not going to stop attacking American ships. So it's not that useful of a treaty, but it's one of our first dealings. During George Washington's term, we know we also get the Pinckney Treaty, right? That's the treaty made with the Spanish about our ability to continue using the Mississippi River and especially New Orleans for shipping rights. Okay, then we get our new president, our second president, right? John Adams. And since the Jay Treaty has settled things down a little bit with the English, it is also, of course, we know, ramped things up with the French, right? They are extra angry that we had, as a country, said America was going to stay neutral, but then gone ahead and made a treaty with the British. So the French are very angry. They up their attacks on U.S. ships, right? And this cartoon that's in the background is a very well-known one of the XYZ affair, by the way. You see on the left there the 3 American diplomats. They are talking with Talleyrand, who's depicted as the many-headed monster. Now, of course, they didn't actually talk with him. They talked with his diplomats, X, Y, and Z, right? But that's what's going on in this cartoon anyway, with the overly violent French Revolution happening in the background there. But at any rate, John Adams, we know, decided to negotiate with the French, and it didn't go well the first time, right? France wants a bribe before they'll even consider discussing stopping the attacks of U.S. ships, and this really makes the United States feel disrespected. They don't want to pay the bribe, but they do go ahead, John Adams does and Congress does, use money to strengthen the Navy and the military ships, right? So we never officially go to war with France over this issue, but it is sometimes called a quasi-war at sea. Quasi means sort of. So it wasn't an official war declared by us or France, but there was definitely some show of military strength on our side. After we did that, Adams, remember, tries again to negotiate with the French. By this time, Napoleon has taken over, and he is the one who does go ahead, agree to stop attacking American ships. Okay, moving into some new content then. So we're at our third president now. We know Thomas Jefferson, right? One thing we didn't talk about with George Washington and John Adams is that in addition to issues going on with England and France, they also had issues with kingdoms in North Africa, which are called the Barbary States. You can see them on the map there in the lighter purple is where these kingdoms were. The darker purple is areas out into the sea where pirates from these northern African countries, states would go out and attack. Okay? Washington and Adams were both paying tribute or a bribe, essentially, to these kingdoms to keep them from attacking United States ships that are sailing in the Mediterranean Sea to trade with places like Italy. Well, when Thomas Jefferson comes into the presidency, he's not as into paying tribute. And then on top of that, right away, the King of Tripoli ups the amount that he's asking for and says he's going to declare war on the United States if he doesn't get it. Thomas Jefferson doesn't actually declare war in response, but he does end up fighting sort of a half-hearted war until about 1804. Then the U.S. really begins bombarding the northern African states with cannon. They're like, we got to wrap this up. We got to take care of this. Eventually, Tripoli and the U.S. sign a peace treaty that there will be no more bribes paid and no more attacking of American ships in the Mediterranean Sea. Relatedly, there's an interesting incident with a U.S. ship called the Philadelphia. You can look that up if you want to know more. So meanwhile, back in the U.S., there's some other foreign affairs issues going on for Thomas Jefferson. We know Louisiana and New Orleans was originally controlled by Spain, right? And we made the Pinckney Treaty with Spain, allowing us to use the port of New Orleans and whatnot. Well, in 1800, Spain sells all of Louisiana, including New Orleans, back to the French. And this is the French with Napoleon in charge at this point. So the Pinckney Treaty no longer applies because it's a treaty with Spain, not with France. So Napoleon does not have to honor that treaty. This causes a lot of concern among American farmers in the West, meaning in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana area, because if Napoleon doesn't honor that treaty, they're not going to be able to ship their crops down the Mississippi River for sale. So in 1803, Thomas Jefferson sends James Monroe to try to buy New Orleans, and he authorizes Monroe to use up to $7.5 million to buy New Orleans. It's that important to America. Well, Napoleon's in his quest to take over the world, but it's not going so great by this point. He needs some money. He doesn't need some land in America, so he actually offers a counteroffer to sell all of Louisiana for $15 million. And America jumps on that. I mean, we're talking about 2 cents an acre here. So that's how we get all of Louisiana, that huge, you can see sort of orangish, pinkish color in the middle there. So almost doubles the size of the United States at this time. There is some debate about whether or not this purchase is constitutional. We know Thomas Jefferson was a strict interpreter of the Constitution, right? It didn't say bank, we can't have a bank. Well, there were people who sort of came back in his face with, yeah, Thomas Jefferson, it doesn't say you can buy new land either, but you did. So there's a little bit of discrepancy going on there. But at any rate, this is a foreign affair dealing with the French, right? We buy Louisiana. Now, that's not it for Thomas Jefferson. He had a busy term as president as far as things like foreign affairs go, but troubles with England and France continue for Thomas Jefferson. We know that supposedly there was a treaty made at the end of the XYZ affair with the French. We know we have the Jay Treaty made under George Washington with the English. But guess what? Neither England or France stops attacking American ships. The attacks continue. And in fact, they kind of up the ante. England starts impressing U.S. sailors. And this kind of impressing means forcing into service, pressing them into service. What they would do is they would board American ships and take sailors on those American ships and say, you're not really an American, you're somebody from the English Navy who deserted, and we're going to take you back and force you to work on our naval ships. So that was happening. And between 1803 and 1807, so the early to middle parts of Jefferson's term, England seizes more than 1,000 American ships, and France about half that many. So, I mean, this is no small issue, y'all. So, what Jefferson proposes and Congress goes along with is something called an Embargo Act. An embargo is a halt of trade, and this Embargo Act completely halts all trade with all countries. Like, he just pulls all of American ships off the ocean, off the sea, keeps them at home. Nobody's trading with anybody. This way, nobody can get attacked. Well, the idea is for it to hurt France and England, for them not to be getting supplies they need, and for them to say, fine, we'll stop attacking your ships, just keep trading with us. In reality, it does hurt them, but it hurts the United States more. You can see in the cartoon in the background, up in the upper right, oh, this cursed oh, grab me. Well, if you look at oh, grab me backwards, that spells embargo. So that's sort of the early 1800 humor in this cartoon here. But the oh, grab me, and you can see the turtle there, like Americans are feeling the pinch, right? Businessmen couldn't buy or sell anything. Even laborers who worked at the docks or sailors who worked on ships, like they're all out of jobs. So this embargo, while it did keep our ships safe, is really hurting Americans as well. The embargo eventually ends in 1809 and is traded in for something called the Non-Intercourse Act, which is an embargo again, but it's only no trade with England and France. It does reopen trade with other countries, like, say, the Spanish, so that the American economy isn't being hurt quite so bad. In 1808, Thomas Jefferson follows George Washington's precedent and decides to step down as president. And the U.S. elects James Madison as our next president. He's another Democratic Republican, by the way. Now, we just talked about the Non-Intercourse Act, meaning there's no trade going on with England and France, but there is with other countries. So in 1810, Congress passes something called Macon's Bill. And because the economy is still being hurt by not trading with France and England, what Macon's Bill says is America will start trading again with France or England, whoever treats us best. Napoleon jumps in and says, I'll treat you well, I'll stop attacking your ships. Now, he really has no intention of doing that, but America accepts his offer, and so now there is trade with every country except England. This starts to cause issues, right? This makes the English angry, and this becomes the first in a growing list of issues with the British. So if you look up on the slide on the left there, the impressment issues continue. They're taking American sailors, the English are taking American sailors from ships that are going to trade with France or Spain or wherever. The trade conflicts continue. I just explained about that. In addition to these, though, the British also begin giving aid, weapons, and encouragement to Native Americans out west. Remember, the Louisiana Purchase has happened, and American settlers are continuing to push further and further west into Native American land. The Native Americans are not happy about this, of course, and we're going to look more into that in more detail in the future. But at any rate, they want to fight back, and the British help the Native Americans fight against the Americans. Obviously, this makes Americans angry. They want Britain to stay out of it, right? Americans also have a desire for Canada. Remember, that is still controlled by the British up north there. And if that was American land, the border would be safer. And as well as we were just starting to get sort of general expansion fever, wanting more land. The 1800s worldwide is an era where more land equals more power. So Americans are looking to have Canada as well. So for all of those reasons, there's a clamoring for war. And in 1812, James Madison asks Congress, and Congress agrees to declare war on England. This is America's first official declaration of war as a nation. and we're going back to war against England. So some people call this kind of the Revolutionary War Part 2, right? That even though we'd won our independence from England, during all the time that we've been independent so far, they really have not treated us like an independent nation, and so we're going at it again. Okay, now we're going to learn more about the war itself in class, but long story short, spoiler alert, America wins again. The war ends in 1814, and there's a number of effects of this war. First off, Native Americans who sided with the British are weakened because the British lose, so that hurts the Native Americans' cause as well. Because we beat England, still the top military power in the world at this time, and we beat them a second time, national pride is increased. People are feeling pretty big and like, yeah, America, go USA. We get some war heroes created during this war. William Henry Harrison is going to become our 9th president. Andrew Jackson's going to become our 7th president. They sort of rise to fame during this war. U.S. manufacturing grows because, of course, we're not trading, especially with England during this war, so we have to create more of our own stuff. So poor Alexander Hamilton killed in that duel, but he would be happy to know that big business is starting to grow in America. The Federalists are also weakened by this war because they oppose it. They oppose it pretty much on principle because James Madison is a Republican and he's for it. But because the war goes so well and the Federalists were against it, people start to really not like Federalists. That party's going to start to fade out. We also get some respect from foreign nations. And in the end, the Treaty of Ghent is the treaty that wraps this war up. Now, one thing that's really important to note about Treaty of Ghent is that the original issues that caused this war, the impressment, the trade problems, the British supporting the Native Americans, us wanting to take over Canada, none of that gets solved. We don't get any more land. The Native Americans are still out west, and it's still going to continue to be an issue for Americans who move west well into the 1860s, and in fact continues to be issues between Native Americans and American today. All of this continues to be a problem. So in some ways, it's not a very effective war, but in other ways, in sort of intangible, you can't really see it on the outside ways, it's really important in the growth of America as a nation to be respected. All right, 1816, James Madison also follows precedent and steps down after 2 terms. James Monroe is elected. He's another Democratic Republican because, as I told you, the Federalist Party kind of petered their way out during the War of 1812. There's a couple of issues during James Monroe's term. Both of these are dealing with Spain. First, we know that the Spanish no longer control Louisiana. They had sold it, given it to the French, and then that got sold to us. But the Spanish do have land in South America, west of the Louisiana Purchase, down in the Southern American continent and Central American continent, and also in Florida. Now, there are some problems going on with Florida because of the way the border butts right up against Georgia and other American territory. In general, Thomas Jefferson had tried to buy Florida. Spain said, no, we're not selling. And issues really start to ramp up. 1804 to 1818, American slaves in the South are escaping to Florida. It's a quick place for them to get to, and then they can be free, right? Also, Native Americans living in Florida, particularly the Seminole, they're still like, I don't know why Spain says it's their land and you say it's your land. It's really all our land. So the Seminole are attacking from Florida as well. They're raiding in Georgia. So we've got slaves going into Florida, Spanish Florida. We've got Seminole attacks coming out of Spanish Florida. And Monroe's like, we got to do something about this. So in 1818, he sends Andrew Jackson, remember, big war hero from the War of 1812, to protect the border. Those are the orders that Jackson's given, protect the border. Well, he kind of oversteps his bounds, and he actually invades Florida instead. He goes into Florida on the offensive and attacks multiple military posts near the border. So Spain complains about this, of course, like, Monroe, dude, get Jackson under control, get him out of our land. Monroe doesn't do that. He instead tells Spain, look, either govern your territory, keep our slaves on our side, send them back if they escape there, keep the Seminole on your side, or, if you can't control Florida, get out of this land. Well, Spain is not really in a position to go to war with America at this point. We'll see why on the next slide. So they avoid war by selling Florida to the United States for $5 million. Now, the reason why Spain needed to avoid war with the U.S. is because they're busy with a lot of other problems. Starting in 1810, their colonies in Spanish America are rebelling. We've got the common colonial people in all of South America rebelling against the Spanish king. Okay, this is inspired, of course, by the revolutions in America and in France, right? The colonial people uprising against the king. Well, by 1825, all of the area, all of the land in South America has overthrown the king and is free and independent. But by earlier in Monroe's term, say around 1820, many of them had won independence. Kings in other European countries threatened to help Spain reclaim this land. So we're talking about, maybe from Germany, etc. They're going to come and they're going to support Spain in taking this land back. Well, those new nations in South America ask the United States for help. As James Monroe is deciding what to do, he and Congress notice that, remember really, that under Spanish rule, the U.S. could not trade with any of the colonies in South America. But now that all these Latin American nations are their own independent countries, they could be new possible trade partners for us. And this would be really great for our economy. So Monroe does decide to get involved in this issue. He doesn't actually get involved with troops, though. What he does is he makes this proclamation called the Monroe Doctrine. And what he says is he tells all of Europe, any attack on a South American country will be considered the same as an attack on the U.S. So, in other words, don't come over here. Stay on your side of the ocean. Stay in Europe. If you come and try to take any land on this side of the ocean, the U.S. is going to get involved, right? So he kind of puts a threat out there. It works. The Europeans back off. They do not try to reclaim the territories that Spain had lost over here, and all of North and South America then are new, free and independent nations. All right, there are additional issues that go further than this. In 1830, there's an Indian Removal Act, it's called. In 1846, there's a treaty made with British to get some land in the Oregon area. In 1846 to 1848, America's going to go to war with Mexico, one of the new nations that was newly formed in the 1820s there. But we'll talk about all of those in future weeks and videos.